Is CM Punk old? Maybe he is. You know, with this past kind of Raw having the kind of Punk Reigns feud kind of rage on as we build on to WrestleMania. We kind of had another kind of segment between them where we kind of had a little kind of reformation, it seems like, of the bloodline due to the comments that CM Punk made a couple of weeks ago about, you know, their father essentially kind of activating all the Samoans, kind of like sleeper agents essentially to, you know, kind of put Punk in their line of sights. We're kind of seeing some cool subtleties, I think, with Jey Uso kind of changing kind of back to that ruthless kind of aggressive bloodline counterpart that he kind of used to be, you know, and Jimmy kind of being apprehensive about that, kind of struggling with, you know, the disrespect obviously that Punk is bringing to Reigns, you know, due to this whole kind of challenge for the title that is happening, you know, at Mania. This kind of all does come to a head on this segment where we essentially have the bloodline, the OG Usos and Reigns trio kind of powerbomb and take out Punk on the announce table, and the promo before this that happened last week, we kind of had Reigns fight back or jab back with the dad comments with, you know, Punk being essentially old, and that kind of made me think about generally kind of like where most of WWE stars kind of stand. And I did kind of make a video a couple, I think, months back, you know, kind of talking about the, you know, average age of the world champions that we've had, and kind of the situation that, you know, we don't have a lot of younger stars. I think that's been kind of addressed, which I have talked about, you know, in past videos, where, you know, we have a lot of the younger NXT guys that have now come up and have made kind of waves, you know, in Melo and Ilya, and obviously now notably Oba, you know, Javon, Stephanie, you know, and Julia, I should also mention. But, you know, I do think that, you know, with what CM Punk, you know, was kind of triggered by with that old statement, it's kind of a testament to, you know, I think especially the men's division, the lack of cultivation of, like, you know, growth for the younger talent. And CM Punk still obviously taking a lot of pride in being a main eventer and still keeping up with everybody. Does that really matter ultimately when it's at the, you know, really the sacrifice and growth of the division, when, you know, we do have the feud of Roman and Punk, but if Punk does win this, what does it kind of say to the new generation, essentially led and flocked by Roman Reigns, if he does take this L here? Especially when, in reality, yeah, you know, Punk is past his prime, whereas Roman is, you know, in his. It just, that old comment really just made me think about, like, you know, LA Knight once again, right? I was talking about maybe him potentially winning the world title. He's also, like, I think 39 or 39 or 40. You know, Damian Priest and Gunther both respectively are like in their either mid to late 30s, right? And they were relatively new stars being kind of made and considered newer stars, but, you know, in terms of age, they are, you know, kind of halfway through their primes at this point already, you know. So it's like, you know, besides, like I said earlier, those couple of NXT names I've mentioned who have made their come ups, like a lot of the younger stars haven't flourished that they need to really be, you know, primed in that top position that Punk is really defensive about, you know what I mean? I think besides maybe Braun Breaker and a lot of the stuff they're doing with Division, with trying to prime up a lot of those younger guys, I think there hasn't really been that grasp or that urgency, I feel, for anyone to try to become and take that spot that Punk seems so desperate to kind of keep. You know, I think, you know, especially with Cody not holding the WWE title at the time, to make justification for Reigns to not pick Cody, you know, and pick Punk, essentially kind of shows the lack of focus and the lack of oomph that world title kind of does have, due to the fact that, you know, they did have to take the title off Cody to justify Reigns not picking Drew, you know, because you don't want that heel, you know, there's no reason for necessarily him and Drew to go at it again, especially when he's beaten Drew, and especially when obviously he's eloquently said, you know, there's obviously a real hate and disdain for Punk, for the Reigns character. Don't get me wrong, I do think that both nights, I think this build of to WrestleMania 42 has actually been a lot stronger than the build to WrestleMania 41. I think, you know, that long extended Jay Gunther stuff has been it was kind of mid until like the last couple of weeks. I think a lot of the stuff that was going on, I think basically only the women's triple threat stuff was really compelling, whereas the John Cena heel stuff was kind of like, you know, we were trying to figure out where it was going. And beyond that, I think you know, Reigns and Punk are doing a decent job of trying to build this up and giving us intrigue with multiple factors, especially with like the bloodline stuff happening. There is kind of an age problem in WWE, and I wonder if, you know, there will be more of like an actual addressing of that kind of moving forward. I mean, obviously we have guys like Oba, like I said, guys like Mello, Trick is coming up as well, who are here to kind of, you know, usher that in, you know. But like, especially with how AEW is kind of doing it, I wonder, you know, especially with a champ like MJF, who's now approaching 30, but still at this point a household made name, who has like you know, who could still have another whole other ascension. You know, it's like there aren't really prospects like that exist for WWE right now, because they haven't really been realized, you know. So I'm just hoping that, you know, while, you know, CM Punk took those comments to heart, he needs to also realize that like his generation, and the reason that, you know, the idea of clinging on to that guard despite being your age is kind of what does damage the product in the long run. You know, when Gunther did kind of lose to Punk, I think at SummerSlam, I think it did serve the story of having you know, Rollins cash in. You know, to me that kind of stung, because I felt Gunther was this unbeatable boss, essentially, that you kind of had Punk prevail over in just a really, you know, great David versus Goliath wrestling match. But I did feel like, you know, Gunther's aura was greatly diminished, whereas I think if Seth just kind of involved himself in the match regardless, I think it would have been it would have served both the story purpose of taking Punk's moment away while also protecting Gunther in the process, you know. And I think that type of thinking has kind of eluded WWE in this situation where we kind of do have these old stars, you know what I mean? And Reigns isn't wrong when he's kind of pulling up on Punk and going, man, like, I'm bigger, stronger, better, faster, like, you know, you're like, why am I fighting a geriatric in the main event? What is this, Vince era? I think a lot of times in the WWE, the nostalgia act, you know, is not really welcome. It's not like how, you know, Master Roshi in the Tournament of Power can just bust out, you know, techniques and, you know, we justify it. I don't think we can really have that same thing in WWE prevalently, especially all the time, especially when you had stuff like Goldberg running around, and, you know, a lot of those older guys running around getting opportunities and time, especially, that you should be giving to the younger stars. Two generations of wrestling kind of clashing a little bit in that way. So kind of wanted to just make a quick video on that and kind of point out that, you know, but, you know, we are still pedaling on with Raw and SmackDown on the road to WrestleMania. You know, we're covering AEW now, so there's a little bit more firing in the kettle for me to kind of compare and judge the two side by side. So we'll see kind of what happens. We have Dynamite on Wednesday. We just had Revolution, you know, where we had like two great young stars in Paige and MJF coming into their 30s, having great, you know, feuds and world title matches that, you know, maybe 10 years down the line we'll look back and be really fond of in their early years, you know, and hope that they grow and return to even greater and bigger stars. You know, I don't really see those flowers enough in WWE, you know, so hopefully we get more of that, you know, and a less pearl clutching for people like Punk about that status and stature, you know.